Hello all you crazy people out there, my name is Michael, I like wizards and dragons and making games, and last we left off, we were talking about creating instances in GameMaker through code, and we created this very fun little situation where we can just run around and spawn scarecrows at our feet. This is a totally normal thing to do in a game, I promise. Anyway, today we are going to take a bit of a step sideways into something completely different, and that is going to be random number generation. So, I made a few changes to this project since our last little experiment. I made the room smaller so that it's just, again, the size of the screen, and so that you don't have to, like, scroll the camera to see all of it, follow the player. I did that mainly because what I'm going to do in this video is going to take place in a bit of a smaller arena than what we did before. And I'm also, I got rid of the behavior where scarecrows will automatically, like, run off the screen because I think that's going to be a little bit distracting. Anyway, random number generation. So there's a couple of ways that you can generate random numbers in GameMaker. So if you type random control space, you'll see that there's a couple different functions which are related to randomness. There's actually more than this. But to start off with, we have random range. That's a good one. We have irandom, and we have irandom range, and we have a couple of others, which I'll also get to by the end of this video. So we'll start with the first one, the simplest. So the random function will return a random number between 0 and whatever its input value is. So if I say random of, say, 100, this function is going to return a random number between 0 and 100. And if I want to spawn an instance at a random position in a room, I can say var spawn x equals random 100, and I can use that as the x coordinate that we spawn this instance at. If I say var spawn y equals random 100, we can use spawn y as the coordinate that we spawn the instance at. And now when I run the game, when I hit the spacebar, we are going to spawn a bunch of scarecrows, not at the player's feet, but in a somewhere in a random square. Well, somewhere random in a square that's 100 by 100 up in the corner of the room. And that's going to be the random function. So this is great, but it only does generate random numbers between 0 and the input value. So that's a bit of an annoyance if you are ever trying to generate a random number between two values. Of course, that is not an insurmountable task. You can math that out to work that out in different ways to allow you to generate a random number between, say, 100 and 200 if you'd like. Or you can use one of the other random functions, which is random range. And this is a function which is going to return a random value between two numbers. So if I wanted a random number between, say, 100 and 500, let's say 100 and 500 on the x and a range of 100 and, like, 300 on the y, then this is going to do exactly that. We are going to spawn our scarecrows at a random value in between this range on the x-axis and this range on the y-axis. And if I were to keep hitting the spacebar, we can see that we would approximately have this rectangle filled in. There's going to be patches where things are more or less dense early on, but on the whole, if you do this enough times, it should average out. 'Tis the nature of random number generation. And we've got a nice population of scarecrows here. Hello. Alright. So what do I want to do next? Alright, I think I'm going to go for the irandom functions next. So the random and the random range functions will return numbers with fractional parts, floating point numbers in the computer science parlance. So you could end up with, like, say, in this example, 200.0, but you could also end up with, like, 175.4 or, like, 253.17. It's going to span pretty much the entire spectrum of, like, decimal values between 100 and 500. Obviously not with infinite accuracy because computers, but the point is, this function is not going to return to you an integer or a whole number. And of course, there are ways that you can math that out if you'd like. You can round it yourself with a floor to round it down function, or a ceil to round it up function, or round function just to round it up or down if you'd like. But there are also two other functions, which are irandom range and irandom. That's the I stands for integer. So this function will only give us a whole number. Visually, this isn't really going to change much because, like, the difference between, like, a scarecrow at coordinate x equals, like, 153.75 and a scarecrow at coordinate x equals 153 is not really all that interesting, and you won't really be able to see the difference just looking at it by eye. So I think what I'll do instead is... I think I'm going to apply the random number to the object scale instead. So if I say new instance, let's say var scale equals random range between like 1 and like 3. And then I can say new instance dot image x scale equals scale, new instance dot image y scale equals scale, because I do want the scale to be the same on the x and the y. Because not doing so would look pretty weird. If I were to run the game now, and if I were to... You did not like that for some reason. Oh, that's because, those variables no longer exist, and using a variable that does not exist will cause an error. If I hit the spacebar, we can see that I'm going to spawn a bunch of scarecrows, and they're going to come in all different sizes. Some of them are going to be fairly large. Some of them are going to be a little bit on the small side, like that one. And some of them are going to span the range in between. I think that might have been probably the biggest one yet that we've seen. And these exist on a spectrum. I guess if you wanted to see the output of this function, I'm trying to avoid using examples where I just like show a message either in a message box, 2.62, 2.80, 1.61.
Hey.
I'm trying to avoid examples here where I just either show a message in a message box or print something out in the console. At least early on, when we do more math-intensive things, I'll probably do that. But I realize that that's probably one of the more boring ways to learn computer programming, so I don't want to do it. Anyway, this is giving us numbers with fractional parts. It covers the entire range from 1 to 3. The numbers occupy a continuous spectrum. So if I use the iRandom function, and if I run the game now, we are going to spawn scarecrows, which either are going to come in a small, medium, or large variety. So the scale of all these guys is going to be either 3, 2, or 1, and we can indeed see that we've got some very large ones, we've got some very small ones, we've got some that are in between, but we don't have the entire spectrum of values. And if I were to do the thing where I show the message and show the number in a message box again, we can see that we are going to get whole numbers out of this random function. So 1, 3, or I don't know why we're not dismissing the box sometimes. Either 1, 3, or 2. 1, 2, or 3. And if you ever want a random whole number, that is what the iRandom function is for. Of course, this does go for both iRandom and iRandom range functions. So up next, there's still another couple more random functions of which I'd like to talk about. We have the choose function, and I think this is a really underrated function in GameMaker. I really like it. It will pick a random value from the different inputs that you give it. So if you say choose between 10 and 20, half the time it's going to choose 10, it's going to return 10, half the time it's going to return 20. This function can take as many arguments as you want. It is known as variadic in the computer science parlance. So if you gave it more arguments like this, it would choose equally 10, 20, 30, 40, or 50. And this can be useful if you want something like just like a discrete, like coin toss or a random option with a discrete number of outcomes. As there often is in computer programming, there's a million ways that you can accomplish this with or without the choose function. But I like this because of its simplicity. So if we wanted to, let's next give this new instance a random rotation, which I can use image angle for. Let's actually comment this out, because I think having scaled and also rotated scarecrows is going to be distracting. If I said image angle equals choose, and we'll select some random degree values, for example, 0 degrees of rotation, 90, 180, or 270. If I run this code, these scarecrows are going to be spawned with a random rotation, either 0 degrees of rotation, which would be standing straight up, 180, which is pointing in the opposite direction, 90 or 270, which is going to be somewhere off to the sides. And if I wanted to add some more... If I wanted to add some more possible values that the scarecrow could spawn the rotation at, I could add more options to the choose function. Alright, and now we can run around spawning scarecrows on their sides. This is a super weird example, I'm sorry. Anyway, so this function, the choose function, will return whatever you give it, which means that you can pass it things other than numbers and it'll just work. Another example might be something like if you want to generate a random player name, choose something like this. And this will randomly choose one of these names from this list. I don't remember what comes next in the NATO alphabet, like. I think it's Foxtrot. I don't remember what G is. I feel like I should remember what G is. It's going to bother me if I can't come up with it. Anyway, in this case, the choose function will return strings instead of numbers. It doesn't really matter what the input is. It could also be other things like GameMaker assets, sprite assets, arrays, or pretty much anything. And again, there are plenty of ways you can choose a random value from a list, but I like the choose function. It keeps things simple. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to talk a little bit about the random related functions which don't actually pertain to producing a number. So let me start out by just running the game now, and I'm going to run this game several times in succession, and I'm going to ask you to pay attention to the order in which scarecrows like spawn. And I'm going to be showing off the choose function here, but this is going to apply to all the random functions. So this one came out diagonal, facing, I guess I'll use cardinal directions, northwest, then southeast again, then southwest, then north. And if I run the game again, we can see that no matter where I spawn these guys, we generated the same sequence of random numbers, so northwest, southeast, southeast, southwest, and north. If I do this again, we're going to see the same pattern emerging, and it would be kind of useless. Okay, so it turns out the next ones in the sequence are just south and southeast again. Anyway, it would be kind of useless as far as the RNG in your game goes if every single time you requested a random number to be generated, either with one of the random functions or with the choose function or with something else, it would be kind of useless if it produced the same result every single time, every time the player plays the game. And this is actually deliberate. So this happens because when you run your game through the GameMaker IDE with the play button or the F5 button or something like that, for those of you who don't know how random number generation works, true randomness is actually really hard. It's possible to do. There is hardware RNG. There are other options for generating true randomness in computers, which have applications in things like cryptographic security. Probably the most famous example of this is, I think, Cloudflare's DNS provider for cryptographic security keys. Has a camera pointed at a wall of lava lamps and uses noise in the video feed to generate random numbers. Anyway, that is obviously fairly overkill for most video games. For most video games, what we instead use is something known as pseudo-random number generation, or PRNGs, because pseudo-random number generation is way too many syllables. And there's a whole bunch of different PRNG algorithms out there that you can use. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. The ones that GameMaker currently is using is known as WELL 512A. And if you want to learn how that works, I'll put a link to a paper that describes it in the description of the video. But in essence, what all of them do is they take some starting condition, which is known as the seed value, which is a big, long... It's going to be some big, long number, 128 bits, 512 bits. Different algorithms might use seed values of different sizes. And it's going to do a bunch of really simple math operations on them, like multiplication, addition, power functions, bit shifts, that kind of thing. And it's going to scramble the number up in such a way that it is sufficiently different from previous numbers in the sequence, and so that you can't, like, detect a pattern in... At least you can't easily detect a pattern in the sequence of random numbers. Sometimes if you watch it for long enough, you can sort of figure it out. And all that is to say that when you run your game through the GameMaker IDE, it's going to start out with the same seed value every single time. And that sounds kind of weird, but it's actually on purpose. This is so that if you're testing something and there's a bug in your game which relates to some random outcome, imagine the game only crashes when the player rolls a nat 1 on a d20 or something. This is to make it somewhat easier to be able to reproduce the conditions that created the bug with the RNG, so that you can debug it and figure out what's going on. But when you're actually playing the game, that isn't really something you want. So fortunately, if you were to build your game as an executable, which is a standalone version of the game which will work without the GameMaker IDE, GameMaker will correctly set the random seed to some truly random value so that you can have different outcomes every single time. There's also a function... Well, there's a couple of functions. One is randomize, and you can call this, and this will randomize the seed that the RNG uses. I forget if it, like, sets the seed based on the system time or if it sets the seed based on, like, hardware RNG.
Hey.
But whatever the case, it should be sufficiently random for games. We also have random eyes with an S for those who are less of a fan of American English. You would think that this difference would be less contentious than it is, but I have seen multiple large flame wars within the game dev community about which one of these functions you should use. We also have, if you want to set the seed yourself, random set seed. And fortunately for the sanity of the community, this does not have a dialectic alternate spelling. And you can set the seed value to whatever you like using the random set seed function. You can also use the random get seed function, and this will return the random seed so that you can do whatever operations you'd like with that, store the state of the RNG if you'd like. That said, I do believe, since the WELL 512A RNG algorithm does have a 512-bit internal seed, I don't believe random get seed will actually return all of it, which can be somewhat of a problem if you want to be able to, like, you know, reinstate the RNG. But random set seed can be useful for various things. A lot of games with procedural generation, Minecraft probably being the most famous one, will give the player access to setting the random seed if they like, which they can use to have control over the world that they generate. If they generate a random world which they like, they can take the seed and they can send it to their friends, that kind of thing. There's a different game which I'm working on than the one that I usually talk about that allows the player to do that. Anyway, I think that's about it. I don't think there are any other functions which I can which I would like to talk about which pertain to randomness. You can see that there's a couple of other miscellaneous ones. Move random. This will, like, jump an object to a random position in the room, which I'm not super a fan of. I never showed this off, by the way, did I? So if I call randomize in the create event or in the room start event or in the game start event, or just generally somewhere where the game is, like, first starting, and if I were to generate a bunch of scarecrows, we're going to now see that we don't suddenly spawn all these scarecrows, like, facing the same direction in the same sequence every single time we run the game. So that was the point of that little rant. Is there anything else? I think that's about it. So I'm going to leave this off here. My name is Michael. I like Wizards and Dragons and making games. I like to post videos on all kinds of things you can do in GameMaker, so if any of this appeals to you, feel free to subscribe. I like to post videos on both beginner stuff in GameMaker like this, and also more complicated things. I have a Patreon, so if you want to contribute to the channel, links to that can be found in all the usual places. You should all go check out Wizarducks and the Lost Hat, which is one of the games that I like to work on when I'm not doing YouTube things. I guess I'll put a link to both that and the other game that I mentioned down in the description of the video. I hope you all found this useful, and I will see you all later. Special thanks to Zenjamin, Zach Robinson, Squarecrow, Spide-Eye Games, Pixelated Pope, Paradox, Nykotic, Manta Ray, GameMaker, GameArt Indie, Edward Holt, DJ Gibbles, Brenton, Bokeh Dev, and Argo the Knot for supporting these videos. If you want to join the ranks of these very cool people, head on down to the Patreon page in the video description to join the fun.